Good evening and welcome to l'Intervista on AGON channel. Tonight, meet the man who helped improve your lives. From the Tirana airport to the big Teg shopping center and many other places around this country. And even the passport or the ID you're holding in your pockets, well, it looks much cooler because of people like Michael Granoff. Welcome to AGON channel, Michael. He is the head of the Albanian-American Enterprise Fund. What this is all about, let's take a look. Good evening and welcome to the program. Tonight on AGON channel, meet the man who helped improve your lives. From the Tirana airport to the big Teg shopping center and in many other places around this country. And take this, even the passport or the ID you're holding in your pockets right now, well, they look much cooler thanks to people like Michael Granoff. Welcome, Michael. He is the head of the Albanian-American Enterprise Fund. What this is all about? Take a look.
Mund të quhet të përmbushur profecia e Fanolit, politikanit dhe shkrimtarit shqiptar kur kurajonte me fjalët: "Mbahu në në mos ki frikë se I ke djemt në Amerikë." Nga toka e premtuar në vitin 1995 me një grant nga qeveria amerikane, lindi historia e Fondit Shqiptaro-Amerikan të Ndërmarrjeve, I cili u përdor si kapital fillestar për të gjeneruar duke u investuar në 40 kompani me një vlerë prej $111 milion në 77 investime, të cilat hapën mbi 5.000 vende pune dhe shtuan $2 miliard në prodhimin e brendshëm kombëtar. Ky partneritet nuk flet vetëm me gjuhën e biznesit, por para së gjithash me atë të progresit.
Michael Granoff, welcome to the program. So first of all, tell us about this fund. What is it all about? Where's the money coming from? How do you pick the projects?
Well, at the end, when communism was ending in Europe, the United States government decided that they would try a new form of foreign assistance, one that would promote private sector development. And so what they did is they agreed to create a series of enterprise funds in each of the formerly communist countries. And actually, the last one created was for Albania. And in 1995, President Clinton asked me whether I would serve on the board of this new fund, which was designed to promote economic development, especially private sector development, in Albania, which was then the poorest country in Europe.
And today you have achieved greatly. I mean, the fund went from what, 30 million to 200 million. I mean, it's been growing systematically. How do you improve the lives of ordinary Albanians?
Well, first is that we started with that as a goal. So when we looked at potential investments, we wanted to do things that we thought would be successful, but also things that would be transformative, that would be able to affect lots of people. Not just affect masses of people, but even train the next generation of leaders, be catalytic in change. And so if you look at the projects that we've done over time, they kind of meet that test. So you showed some pictures of the airport. Well, your first impression of Albania usually is when you arrive at the airport. Well, I can tell you, arriving at the old airport in 1995, you had a view of what Albania was like under communism. When you arrive at the airport today, if you close your eyes and I asked you where you were, you would be in any modern city in Europe. And that's a good example of what we're trying to accomplish here in Albania.
Later on in the program, we're going to be looking at specific programs and specific projects that you've been working on. But first of all, I would like to sort of ask you generic questions about, first of all, the last 18 years. You said you came here first in 1995. The country has changed enormously over the last 18 years. So your experience about that?
Well, you know, it's an interesting opportunity to see the development of a country in kind of real time. Most countries take a very long time to develop. When I first showed up in Albania, I remember looking out my hotel window and there were no cars in Skanderberg Square, none. Today, obviously, I'm late for almost every meeting I go to because of traffic jams. I was worried about getting here because of traffic jams. So the progress that the country has made has really been dramatic. And it's actually an important point, I think, because like in all countries, people focus on the issues and focus on the problems. And certainly this country has its challenges. On the other hand, if you look at the progress that it's made since the time that I started coming, it really is dramatic and has affected every citizen here during that time. And that's really something to celebrate in a way.
I'm sure you faced enormous challenges here over the last 18 years, and then we'll talk about the challenges you're going to face in the next 18 years and over and more. What would you say the biggest challenge has been here in terms of doing what you're trying to do?
Well, if you think about it, when we arrived here, Albania was the poorest country in Europe. Albania was the country that had maybe lived under the most severe form of communism. And so if you think about sort of critical mass, it was missing everything. So people had not had a connection to the rest of the world. Infrastructure was missing. Capital markets were missing. You know, it's probably easier to list what was there than what wasn't there. And so we had to start in a very nascent environment, and we had to kind of build it from the ground up. We had to train the people to do that. There weren't people here who knew how to make investments like this. So at every step of the way, we kind of had to train people, begin the process, and figure it out from there. Now, that was a challenge, but it was also a great opportunity to kind of get in on the ground floor and do it the way we wanted to do it. And we tried to look at it that way. But you're right, it certainly was not an easy thing to do.
You said it's U.S. government money coming to Albania to work on private projects, basically. How much then the government here and the public sector try to interfere or to direct you towards one project or the other? I mean, when we talk about the numbers, we just talked about it, it's sort of an appealing business to anyone, inside and outside of the government. In a country like this, where politics is virtually everywhere, but not just here in Albania, but everywhere, I would say, in the region, in the world, but here specifically because the country is so small and everything tends to be concentrated on Tirana, then when you have this kind of money coming, again, government money coming into basically working on private projects, I must assume that you've faced some challenges there too.
Well, we did, and one of the things that we had to do that really helped was to start at the beginning and be very clear about what we would do and what we wouldn't do. So we set up the ground rules clearly, so people understood, here's the way we did it, here's the way we wouldn't do it, and so they needed to understand that. The second part of it is that...
And did they understand that? I mean, judging from the success, yes. I'm sure at the beginning you faced some...
And they had to understand. And obviously, success makes it easier. So when they looked at the things that work, they said, yeah, this model works. That's something that we should listen to. The second part is that if you think about what we had to do in doing business in a country like Albania, almost everything we do intersects with government somehow. Regulation, anything that you can think of. So it was very important for us to establish good working relationships with every government here in order to do what we needed to do. And one of the interesting things about this place is that while it's quite an active political environment, as you say, we have worked very productively with every government because every government, I think, has realized that what we're doing is in the interest of Albanians. And so we've faced far less pressure from government here than you'd think.
Mm-hmm. There's been a big change in government over the last few weeks after a long tenure of Sali Berisha. Do you believe that the new government of Edi Rama will have an impact in your activities, and if so, how?
Well, it surely will have an impact because of what I just said. Every government has an impact, and we will have an impact on every government. So the first thing I'd tell you is that, interestingly enough, the transition between governments for us has been seamless. Interesting, and a credit to both parties, or both the opposition and majority. Not what people would expect. So in the few days I've been here, I've met with most ministers, I spent a lot of time with the new prime minister, with the president, and the transition has been seamless. The second is, I think that, having worked in the United States government, I think that new governments have a certain energy to them. They want to accomplish stuff, and I think that's good. I think that new energy is helpful. Mm-hmm. The third is that I think that the initial steps this government has taken, certainly in the private sector development area, have been positive. Positive towards us, positive in general. And the last point I would make to you is just that in the end, it's not about how good your ideas are, it's about execution. So one of the big changes of moving from opposition to majority is now you have to actually execute on your ideas, not just talk about them. And the test of this new government, like any new government, is going to be, can it execute on its ideas? And of course, when it comes to the intersection of what government does with what we do, we'd like to be partners with them in executing those things.
Are you satisfied with what you are seeing in the first few weeks of this government? I mean, we know that who follows the day-to-day Albanian politics. I mean, there's been a big challenge in parliament, the boycott by the now opposition, the then ruling party. We've seen also some moves by the government to change some concessions that were given. I mean, there is here always a risk that whenever there is a change in government, everything comes to a halt and sort of everything needs to be reorganized. Do you have a feel that this is happening for perhaps too much because of what you just said? You know, the machine must go on right now. I mean, it's not time to look back, it's time to look forward.
It is. You know, first I should tell you that we intersect with a limited part of government. So a lot of the things that you mentioned are not things that intersect with what we do. Okay. So my answer to you is limited in that scope. But I have to tell you that so far we have seen no stops, no pauses, and the cooperation with the things that we're involved in, either from the fund's point of view or the foundation's point of view, as I told you, have been seamless. So the new government seems interested in working together, seems to have a clear idea, is working with us in a positive way. So we haven't experienced those things, those negative things. But of course, we intersect with them in a small set of the issues they're dealing with.
You manage a fund now that is about worth 200 million right now, more or less. It sort of participates in the GDP of this country with about $2 billion. I'm sure you must have a pretty good pulse of where we're going here with the economy. What's the economic forecast for this country?
Well, first I should tell you again, I'm no economist, right?
Right, but I mean, if you manage the money, I hope you're a good financier.
Probably better than an economist.
Right.
So my answer, I can tell you, is based on our experience,
right.
More from the bottom up, let's say, than from the top down. I think that obviously this country is not disconnected with the rest of the world. It's connected with the rest of the world, and it faces the same pressures that the rest of the world faces. Europe in general faces pressures. Albania is economically a part of Europe, so it faces those pressures for sure. And so I think the economic environment is challenging as it is everywhere in the world. And anyone who tells you that it's not, I think is not walking out every day. On the other hand, the Albanian economy is growing, it's not shrinking. It's growing at a slow rate. And I can tell you that the performance of the businesses that we have in Albania are performing pretty much on projection. So our businesses are performing pretty well, which indicates that economic activity is continuing to progress. And so I guess if you had to forecast forward, I'd suggest to you that probably Albania will make continued, probably slower than maybe people would want, but continued economic progress based on what we see.
Right. You talk to any entrepreneur in this country, and obviously, like in any country, but in particular, obviously, in a place like this one, you know, they'll tell you, you know, rule of law, they'll tell you about the infrastructure, and they'll tell you about the corruption. I mean, if you take these three segments of everyday life for any entrepreneur, obviously, this is a country that has a big challenge ahead of itself. In these three areas, have you seen any progress over the last few years, and do you believe that a lot more has to be done?
First, these three issues are issues for sure. These are issues that are difficult issues, and they're issues that every government in Albania, and actually every citizen of Albania, has to deal with. We've had to deal with them. We have, in fact, tried to structure our investments in a way that limited the potential for intersection with those things. We tried to control things in a way that would minimize the risk of corruption, for example. So I think these are continuing problems. I think they're serious. I think they need to be dealt with. And the reality of problems like this is that they are, you know, more of a journey than a destination. That is, people have to work on them continually. You're never going to get it perfectly right, but you've got to be committed to marching down that that road, and I think it's something that every government in Albania needs to commit to, and I know it's a major priority of the U.S. government.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the fund and the projects that you have you've put in place in this country, because we have some examples about what you've done. I mean, the Tirana airport, you were mentioning it. It's the first the first impact that any traveler has with this country. But it's not just the airport; it's the shopping center, it's the passport and the IDs that people are holding in their hands. Tell us a little bit about how do you actually select the projects? What is it exactly that you want to do? And also, I think it's important to make a distinction between the fund and the other part of the foundation, basically, which is, one is for profit and the other one is not, for non-profit. I think there's an important distinction to be made there.
So just starting there, basically, we have two entities operating in Albania. We have the fund, which makes for-profit investments, and we have a foundation which makes nonprofit investments, but trying to promote development in a similar way. And the way it works is that basically the U.S. government allowed us to take the profits and half of the original capital of the fund and make them into an endowment for a foundation which will be permanent. So we have both of these entities, both operating and doing projects in a very active kind of way. And the way we choose projects, either to invest in or to fund in a nonprofit way, are quite similar. That is, we're looking for things that have a certain criteria for success. We're not interested in just having good intentions. We need them to be successful. Donors, for example, all have good intentions. But when you look at the result of a lot of assistance, it doesn't make a very big impact because it's hard to turn good intentions into reality on the ground. So we want to make sure that it works. We're a large entity here. People are looking at what we do, and they're going to judge us, and we need to make sure it works. And the second is what I mentioned to you at the outset, which is how can it be transformative? More than just successful in one place, successful in one group of people, how can they be transformative? And if you look at all of the investments of the fund, and if you look at the initial investments for the foundation, they meet that test one way or another.
Mm-hmm. And how do you make those investments, once they come to a conclusion, an airport, a shopping center, you name it, how do you make them sustainable? Because obviously it's easier to come here with a lot of money, I build you an airport, I'll build you a shopping center, but then eventually this stuff is in the hands of the Albanians. How much are you involved in trying to then make that a sustainable enterprise?
Well, first I have to tell you that these things are in the hands of Albanians from the beginning.
Okay.
Right? So the execution of all of these things is in Albanian hands, which was one of the keys to success here.
Tell me about
you can't jump
in.
Tell
me about that a little bit, because it's very important. And I'm seeing this myself in this small TV station that we just started. Obviously the Albanian manpower, there's a lot of willingness, a lot of willpower, a lot of energy, but that's something sometimes is not enough. Obviously. And how do you transmit that idea that whatever they got then has to be has to then eventually walk on its own legs?
Well, you're exactly right, because the initial elements were things that we couldn't teach anybody. So Albanians wanted to make a better life for themselves. They were quite well educated. They're pretty good at languages. They're pretty entrepreneurial. Those things nobody can teach you. You either have it or you don't. So Albanians began with a number of the things that were necessary for success. But then we need to train them. Somebody has called the fund the Business School of Albania.
Okay.
In that over all these 18 years, we've made something like 100 different investments. And if you look at all the people that we've intersected with, in a way, we've been the Business School of Albania, that we've tried to train people in sort of the best and brightest we can find in the leading knowledge that we have in America. And transmitting that and being involved in the leadership of that is what has translated into successful entities. Mm-hmm.
You brought some accounts of people who have benefited from your projects. Let's take a listen what they're saying.
Në krahasim me ç'kemi qenë, ka filluar diçka që të ndryshoj për mirë.
Do ta ndryshoj këtë biznes, do ta shpjeg prap, do të ecë se kam dy çuna, detyrimisht ata me kohën që është do ta bëjnë një birari.
Me ndryshimin e zonës, me të bëjë një pedonale, kam menduar që këtë dyqan rrobash ta transformojnë duke kthyer në një restorant.
Në qoftë se do të shkojmë në kuptim të biznesit dhe të aseteve të biznesit, unë them që si objekti është rritur vlera edhe do të rritet me një investim tjetër që parashikon ky fondacion të BEI.
Pedonalja tonë në krahasim me pedonalet e rrethave të tjera është mjaft e gjerë dhe ka boll hapësirë që në një pjesë të saj jo në gjithë gjatësinë të qarkullojë dhe makina dhe në pjesën më të madhe të jetë e bllokuar. Gjegja e cila ishte në projekt që në fillim, them që ajo do ndikojë shumë më mirë nëse lejohet.
Me bamjen e kësaj pedonales ka marrë një pamje krejt tjetër.
Me krahasim me përpara ka shumë ndryshim. 3 muaj dhe para 4 muaj kemi hap, po ka mirë. Mirë për 3 muaj është shumë mirë.
Mas shumë vitesh në Firenze të Italisë, vendosa që artin edhe shumë gjëra që kisha mësuar në Firenze, domethënë zanatin tënd të punës. Edhe visha me e bani në Shkodër.
Duke pasur më shumë kalimtar në këtë rrugë, bën të mundur edhe rritjen e klientave për lokalet edhe bizneset e kësaj zone.
Kena një partneritet të ri që është në ndërtimin e kësaj rruge ndërmjet Bashkisë Shkodrës, Fondit Amerikan të Zhvillimit dhe shoqatave të biznesit.
Mendimi i kësaj pedonale, ndryshimi i kësaj pedonale do të thotë që do jetë një zhvillim dhe një sukses shumë i madh si për biznesin, ashtu edhe për neve personalisht.
Okay, so these are some of the people whose lives you have improved. Tell us a little bit about these specific projects that we've seen in the video, in the pedestrian area.
So these, what you saw just now, are a series of projects that we call business improvement districts. And we've done them in Shkodra, in Korça, and some of the pictures you saw were from Berat. And the idea of these business improvement districts is to form a public-private partnership with the municipal governments, with local business people, and with our foundation to not only just provide some infrastructure support, but leadership support, business support, to try to transform these central business areas into places that will encourage people and business to develop. And they've been, the early indications are they're quite successful, quite transformative, and actually last Sunday when I went to Berat to inaugurate this new one with the board, Prime Minister Rama actually came up and joined me to do that, which I think was an interesting indication of his support and how important these projects can be.
Your experience meeting everyday Albanians when you actually, again, arrived there to inaugurate a project that maybe before was a chaotic street with lots of cars and lots of pollution, and now we see the pictures of a nice pedestrian area where you have actually owners of shops that are thinking of changing their business because they know that